Welcome to this presentation entitled Helping Children and Teens Manage Trauma and Grief Following a Mass Violence Incident. This is part of a new virtual educational series developed by the National Mass Violence Victimization Resource Center called the MVI SNAPS series. The goal of this is to provide brief 20 to 30-minute skills-focused presentations on an array of topics related to mass violence readiness, response, recovery, and resilience. Each SNAP will focus on 2 to 3 specific objectives or takeaways. Today's webinar focuses on the impact of mass violence incidents on youth and families and ways we can provide support to promote recovery. Here are the learning objectives for today's presentation. Describe the impact of mass violence on youth. Describe strategies to help youth in the aftermath of mass violence. Before we get started, it's important to acknowledge that helping children, teens, and families after an MVI can have a major impact on your well-being. Be sure to take care of yourself so you can be effective in helping others. Whenever you're helping a child or adult, keep in mind that there's no time frame for recovery. Your primary role is to support the families through the process. Let's take a moment. What would be most helpful to you today to support your abilities to help children and families after a mass violence incident? Jot these thoughts down so you could refer to them later on in the presentation. Here's what we know about the mental and behavioral health impact of mass violence. In the immediate aftermath, nearly everyone will experience significant distress, including anxiety, fear, anger, rage, helplessness, and kids are no exception. So what are the most common reactions? And keep in mind that the response will depend on the age and developmental level of the child. Nearly all children, regardless of age, will experience an increase in fear and feeling unsafe. For young children, this may result in increased separation anxiety, where their child is fearful of being away from their caregiver. The child may be especially clingy and distraught when apart from a trusted loved one. Younger children may have more frequent nightmares, whereas older kids may be more sad, tearful, or angry. It's not uncommon to see regressions in behavior. For example, young children may have more frequent bathroom accidents, resort back to sucking their thumb or refusing to sleep in their own room. There also may be changes in school performance or a reluctance to even go to school. Kids may have more physical complaints, such as stomach aches or headaches. Children may also develop new fears that were not present before the MVI. And teens may show their distress through increased anger, isolation, depression, and withdrawal from others, or maybe even substance use or misuse. Children are likely to ask a lot of questions about death. Keep in mind that kids hear about death through a variety of different outlets, such as reading, television, the internet, or even video games. These messages can be inaccurate and confusing. For example, a cartoon character may die and then return to life. In addition, adults try to protect kids, so they avoid using words like dead or telling the full truth, which can really lead to confusion. When explaining death to children, caregivers should be honest and direct, choosing simple but correct words that are accurate and appropriate for the child's age. Sometimes it could be helpful for the child to hear that the person is no longer physically present and cannot come back home. When the child is told about the cause of death, may vary according to the reason, but saying the words death or died really is best. Spiritual and cultural explanations can be part of any discussion that includes these main concepts, and many families find that books are helpful in finding and using the right words. A list of books and other resources are available on the NMVVRC website. It's also important to understand what might impact a child's response to a traumatic event, such as an MVI. First are the objective details of the event. In other words, the more severe the trauma, the more severe the response. This also includes the child's proximity or closeness to the event. Were they in the school, in the classroom during a shooting? Were they in the church when a shooting began versus did they hear about it on TV or via social media? Were there others present? Were they injured? Were others injured? Did they see people who might have even been killed? Not surprisingly, the closer the child was to the event, the more they directly experienced it, the more severe the response. The other part of this is the child's subjective experience. How fearful were they that they would be seriously hurt or killed? How afraid were they that someone they loved or cared about would be hurt or killed? Does a child feel they could have or should have done something to prevent the event from occurring? And importantly, the child's exposure to other traumatic events before the mass violence incident, as well as any existing mental or behavioral health problems, will likely increase the severity of the response. Another critical point to share is the difference between a cumulative versus a collective trauma, as this also can impact response to a mass violence incident. Cumulative trauma refers to an individual's exposure to multiple traumatic events. The more traumatic events the child experiences, the worse the outcome. Also, this refers to a more individualized event. In other words, these are single or maybe multiple events that occur to one person, and the response will be very individualized. In contrast, collective trauma refers to a shared experience of loss and serious emotional disturbance. The emphasis here is that this refers to a shared exposure to a terrible event. This can offer a sense of comfort and that individuals do not feel as alone as they may when they're the only victim. However, the con is that they may minimize the impact of the event because they believe that others had it so much worse than they did. So what can we do to help kids after mass violence? What are some ways we could support kids and teens in the aftermath of an MVI? First and foremost, remember you must take care of yourself. Think of an airplane. The flight attendant instructs adults to put on their own oxygen mask before putting one on the child. So back to what we can do to help. The types of supports we provide will vary depending on the age of the child. For example, for young kids, it will be important to provide a sense of safety and reassurance. Encourage the child to express themselves through play and telling stories. Be sure to have a calm and comforting routine for bedtime and in general, maintain a regular routine because that's extremely important to help kids feel a sense of normalcy in their lives. And last but definitely not least, avoid any media exposure for very young kids. Many of the descriptions described for young children will also apply to school-age kids, especially with regards to reestablishing routines that were set in place before the mass violence incident. Children benefit from structure and routines that help provide a sense of normalcy. In addition, encourage and support social connections. Kids need to spend time with their friends. With older kids, some social media may be okay, but still monitor how much time they're spending on social media and definitely be aware of what they are viewing. And encourage kids to stay active. Physical and other types of positive activities can be very helpful for recovery. For teens, it's even more important to support connections and interactions with peers. However, slightly different issues will come into play. Most teens spend a lot of time on social media, so again, be sure to set limits and do share some reliable sources of information. Also, help them to understand that there are some things they can do something about, such as reaching out to a friend, taking time to do something they enjoy, versus things they can't do anything about, and provide teens with a safe space and encouragement to feel their feelings. They're going to be angry, sad, afraid. There are simply no right or wrong ways to feel, and it can be very helpful to remind teens about this. Are you feeling overwhelmed? If these suggestions seem overwhelming, that is okay and expected. Remember, you don't have to do these all at once. These tips are ideas for you to use when helping a child or adolescent. Pick one, try it out. Start small. Make sure you have social supports to help when possible. Be sure to manage your own distress and practice self-care. Set boundaries. Delegate. Learn to say no. You don't have to do it all. Be sure to avoid personal overload. And this includes emotional overload that comes from taking on too many responsibilities, making too many promises at the same time. Don't forget the importance of taking care of yourself. Find balance in your personal and professional lives. Be aware of your own needs. your own experiences, and your reactions to the events. Be sure to seek connections and support from others. Rely on healthy coping strategies and engaging in activities that are meaningful and positive for you. After a traumatic event, it is normal for kids to experience a range of emotions and engage in some unhelpful behaviors. However, if these difficulties persist for months after an event and the suggestions above are not helpful, it may be time to seek professional guidance. Know the resources in your community. If you're interested in learning more about how to help kids following a mass violence incident, please follow the website. Helpful information and resources can also be found on the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. So, how'd we do? Here are those learning objectives. Please take a moment to review your notes from earlier about what would be most helpful for you today to support your abilities to help children and families after a mass violence incident. Was the information provided in this SNAPS webinar helpful to you? And did we meet our 2 learning objectives? And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us at the NMVVRC. Thank you for participating in this MVI SNAPS webinar.